August 7, 1942, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. As the sun rose across the Pacific horizon, 11,000 United States Marines surged onto the beaches in what became the first large-scale Allied assault against Imperial Japan. Operation Watchtower would signal a decisive shift in the Pacific conflict. Yet beyond the sea battles and jungle skirmishes that followed, a surprising weapon appeared in the deep shadows around the island's borders, one forged not from steel or gunpowder, but from the core mechanics of human language itself. The danger was immediate and deadly. In the chaos of jungle fighting where sightlines vanished within yards, where the enemy could speak English, and even wear stolen American uniforms, how could sentries at checkpoints tell apart their own men from Japanese intruders moving under cover of night? The answer emerged from an improbable source, the articulation of a single letter. Master Technical Sergeant James W. Hurlbut, a combat correspondent with the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve, came ashore with the invasion forces on August 10th, in a March 10, 1943 interview archived in naval records. Hurlbut provided first-hand evidence of a security method that soon became standard during the campaign. His words remain the most direct surviving testimony we have concerning pronunciation testing in the Pacific Theater. "We always had passwords that included the letter L," Hurlbut explained, because it was believed difficult for the Japanese to pronounce, since their language lacks an L sound. This observation, simple yet profound, reflected a keen awareness of linguistic patterns. 1. That proved invaluable for American defense operations throughout the battle. Hurlbut pointed out a critical limitation that revealed how the system truly functioned in the field. The test occasionally failed when used against Japanese soldiers who had been educated in English, showing that Marines were facing infiltrators with mixed language abilities. The method, though effective, was not infallible. By 1600 hours for PM on August 8th, the Marines had seized control of the nearly completed Japanese airstrip. Initially known as Lunga Airfield, it was renamed Henderson Field in honor of Major Lofton R. Henderson, a Marine pilot killed at Midway. The runway became operational on August 12th, when the first PBY Catalina flying boat landed. And by August 20th, a permanent air squadron had arrived with 31 aircraft. Control of Henderson Field quickly became the heart of the 6-month-long campaign. With Japanese forces launching one assault after another to reclaim it, security around the airfield and its defensive perimeter took on top priority. Japanese troops demonstrating the adaptability and resolve that marked their combat style across the Pacific attempted numerous nighttime infiltration missions. They advanced through the jungle under cover of darkness, sometimes in pairs, sometimes alone, seeking to gather intelligence, sabotage equipment, or mislead American troops. The dense black jungle gave perfect cover for such efforts. Sentries stationed along the defensive ring had to make split-second judgments about whether the shadows before them hid fellow Marines or enemy soldiers. Standard identification methods often failed. Documents could be stolen. Uniforms might be taken from fallen Americans. Appearance was useless in darkness. Even voices deceived, as some Japanese troops spoke English with surprising skill. What the Marines required was a method impossible to fake something that exposed identity through a trait the infiltrator could not consciously alter. The answer rested in the phonological structure of the Japanese language. To see why this strategy proved so reliable, we must examine the deep contrasts between English and Japanese sound systems. Japanese includes only one liquid consonant, represented in Hepburn romanization as R, though it sounds unlike either the English R or L. Linguistically, this Japanese liquid is known as an alveolar tap. Symbolized in the International Phonetic Alphabet as G, native Japanese speakers produce this sound by quickly tapping the tongue against the alveolar ridge. It's the spot just behind the upper front teeth. English, by contrast, contains two separate liquid sounds. The L in English is a lateral approximant, made by pressing the tongue tip to the alveolar ridge while allowing air to pass along the sides of the tongue. The American R differs entirely, produced further back in the mouth with the tongue raised but not touching the roof at all. These two English sounds occupy separate points in the phonetic map, easily distinguished by native speakers, yet perceived as nearly identical by Japanese. Listeners, this phonological difference is not about physical inability, but about habitual perception shaped by native language. Japanese speakers can technically produce the English L sound. Yet because their language doesn't differentiate between R and L, they often substitute their native tap G for both. Two English ears. This substitution blends the two sounds into something ambiguous, neither clearly R nor L. During wartime, that subtle difference became a matter of survival. In the darkness around Guadalcanal, Marines crafted passwords that exploited this linguistic gap. A single word containing an L, simple enough for an American, but difficult for a Japanese infiltrator to mimic perfectly, could determine life or death at a sentry post. The genius of the approach lay in its simplicity. The test required no written record, no radio communication, and no additional technology. It relied entirely on the universal human limitation that adults struggle to reproduce sounds, absent from their mother tongue. Hurlbut's recollection of passwords containing the letter L provides one of the earliest documented instances of phonetic security, what modern linguists might call acoustic authentication. It was not merely a military tactic, but an intuitive application of phonological science long before such terminology became common. The practice aligned with the long-standing principle that speech sounds reveal deep cognitive patterns unique to each language community. Even in the pre-digital age, American troops were using language as biometric identification. For the Japanese infiltrators, this posed an almost unsolvable challenge. The jungle's oppressive humidity, distorted sound, stress and fatigue weakened concentration, and even fluent bilinguals under such conditions could not easily override lifelong speech habits. Words like lull, follow, or yellow betrayed them instantly. The Marines' sharp-eared sentries, trained to listen for hesitation or substitution, knew that one wrong syllable could expose an enemy spy. A mere flicker of the tongue, a misplaced vowel, or an unnatural rhythm in a whispered response could mean death. In this way, language itself became a weapon. The Marines' knowledge of phonetics transformed into an invisible defense line. The concept bridged anthropology, linguistics, and warfare fields that rarely intersected before the Second World War. What began as a pragmatic password rule evolved into an early form of speech profiling. Decades ahead of modern forensic linguistics, even though it lacked scientific terminology, it demonstrated a remarkable intuition about how speech patterns reveal cultural and cognitive identity. The front lines of Guadalcanal thus became, unexpectedly, a testing ground for applied linguistics. The historical implications extend far beyond Guadalcanal. The use of linguistic traits for identification foreshadowed later developments in code breaking, accent analysis, and voice recognition technologies. In essence, it was a precursor to linguistic intelligence gathering, what scholars now describe as applied phrenology in security contexts. During the war, the technique spread to other Pacific islands, used by Marines and Army units alike. Its effectiveness depended less on technological advantage and more on cultural insight, a deep understanding of how the structure of language could become a tactical tool. Even so, the method had its limits. Hurlbut himself admitted that a few of them could say it, referring to Japanese soldiers who managed to pass the test. This confirmed that pronunciation alone could not serve as an absolute safeguard. The Japanese military's growing exposure to English instruction, along with its own intelligence training programs, gradually eroded the reliability of the sound-based password. In some cases, bilingual spies or interpreters successfully bypassed the test, proving that linguistic barriers could be learned and overcome with enough exposure. Still, the idea persisted. Later in the Pacific Campaign on islands, such as Bougainville, Peleliu, and Iwo Jima field manuals and oral histories describe continued reliance on pronunciation-based checks. Sometimes the chosen password shifted from containing an L to including consonant clusters rare in Japanese, such as th or saint. Each adaptation mirrored an evolving awareness of linguistic difference as a weapon of war. The Marines were not trained linguists, yet, through experience, They had become field practitioners of speech analysis. What makes this episode remarkable is how seamlessly it united military necessity with human cognition. The soldiers who listened for misplaced sounds were, unknowingly, applying phonetic theory that wouldn't be formally articulated until decades later. The challenge they faced was the same faced by modern linguists. Studying second language acquisition, the limits of the adult brain to form new phonemic categories. Under the canopy of the Solomon Islands, this cognitive boundary translated directly into a line of defense. For the Americans, the password represented not just security, but trust. To utter it correctly was to prove belonging, to be recognized as one of the brotherhood in arms. For the Japanese infiltrators, it symbolized exclusion. The sound of an L, a single phoneme, absent from their language, became an insurmountable barrier. The same human faculty that allows us to speak the brain's adaptation to native sound systems was turned against them. Their own mother tongue could cost them their lives. In retrospect, the Guadalcanal password system reveals an extraordinary intersection between warfare, linguistics, and psychology. It reminds us that even amid chaos, language remained the most immediate marker of identity. No uniform or insignia could substitute for the subtle choreography of the tongue and vocal cords. The Marines' reliance on speech reflected an ancient truth. Words have always been both tools of connection and instruments of survival. The same mouth that shouted orders, whispered prayers, and called for medics also guarded the line between friend and foe. The brilliance of this linguistic weapon lay in its invisibility. Unlike encryption devices or coded messages, it required no material components. It could be carried in the mind of every soldier, renewed daily, and adapted instantly to field conditions. It was an auditory cipher, enforced by instinct and repetition rather than machines. The Japanese forces, who mastered tactical camouflage and jungle concealment, could hide from sight, but not from sound. Their accent betrayed them, revealing their origin as surely as a written code. By converting the human voice into a diagnostic tool, the Marines turned a biological trait into a defense mechanism. This practice blurred the boundary between science and instinct, between military strategy and linguistic intuition. It showcased how the very limitations of human perception, the inability to produce unfamiliar sounds, could become a safeguard in moments of danger. What began as a practical improvisation eventually evolved into an unspoken doctrine of sound-based security. Even without formal study, the soldiers had recognized language's diagnostic power. Psychologists later noted that this wartime phonetic test prefigured later research in accent detection, forensic phonetics, and speech biometrics. Today, similar principles govern voice-print identification systems, which analyze subtle frequency patterns unique to each speaker. In 1942, however, these Marines relied on nothing more than their ears, their instincts, and their deep trust in one another's voices. In that sense, the Guadalcanal password was as human as it was ingenious. It transformed a potential vulnerability communication into a shield. The password test also had a profound psychological effect. For the Americans, it instilled vigilance, forcing every man to listen closely and think before speaking. For the Japanese, it sowed anxiety and doubt, undermining confidence in disguise and infiltration tactics. Language, which usually serves to unite, was now dividing enemies by nature itself. The same sound that bonded one group condemned another. In this paradox, the password test served as both defense mechanism and psychological weapon. When the Guadalcanal campaign ended in February 1943, after 6 relentless months of combat, the United States secured its first major ground victory against Japan. The cost was staggering: over 7,000 Allied lives and nearly 30,000 Japanese dead. Yet beyond the casualty lists and strategic gains, the battle left behind a legacy that transcended geography. It revealed how something as simple as a sound could become a decisive tool of survival. Language itself had taken on tactical significance. The Eltist, as Marines informally called it, had proven as essential as any rifle or bayonet in defending the perimeter of Henderson Field. For scholars of linguistics, This wartime improvisation offers a rare field example of phonological awareness in action. It demonstrated that even without academic training, individuals can intuitively grasp the structural properties of speech. By turning phonetics into a battlefield resource, the Marines unknowingly laid groundwork for future studies on language recognition, accent perception, and speech authentication. What they discovered through necessity has since evolved into a foundation of modern security and communication analysis. In broader terms, the Guadalcanal password system reflects a timeless principle. Identity is encoded in sound. Our voices carry traces of history, culture, and cognition patterns, so ingrained that they resist conscious control. The Japanese infiltrators could mimic gestures, uniforms, and even words, but not the rhythm of foreign articulation. Each mispronounced syllable was a confession, each hesitation an unmasking. The battlefield of Guadalcanal thus became a stage where biology, language, and war converged in a single fleeting moment of human vulnerability. Today, more than 80 years later, the echo of that lesson endures. Modern militaries employ biometric voice recognition, acoustic profiling, linguistic forensics technologies that trace their conceptual ancestry back to those tense nights on a tropical island. The Marines who listened in the dark may not have known they were pioneers of a new kind of intelligence, but their instincts anticipated the science of the future. The password of Guadalcanal remains more than a relic of wartime ingenuity. It stands as a testament to the profound power of language itself.